Something extraordinary happened in late 2025, and almost nobody noticed. While the world watched Trump's tariff threats and China's trade restrictions, two countries quietly built something that could change everything about how global power works. I'm talking about Australia and Canada. And before you click away thinking this is boring trade policy, understand this. What they've constructed in less than 3 months might be the most significant geopolitical development since the end of the Cold War. Let's dig in. The timeline nobody connected. Here's what happened, and pay attention to the dates because timing is everything. October 20th, 2025, the United States and Australia sign a critical minerals agreement worth $8.5 billion. Standard stuff, allies cooperating on resources, nothing unusual. But then, just 10 days later, something different happens. On October 30th, Australia and Canada sign their own declaration on critical minerals. It gets published the next day, October 31st. Most analysts ignored it. Routine cooperation between Commonwealth nations, they said, diversifying supply chains, strengthening democratic partnerships, the usual diplomatic language. They missed what was actually in the document. Jump forward to January 20th, 2026. Mark Carney, former Bank of England governor and potential future Canadian prime minister, stands on stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He delivers a speech that makes Australia's treasurer call his team into an emergency meeting. Carney's message is blunt. Middle powers must act together because if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. Read that again. We're on the menu. That's not diplomatic cooperation language. That's survival language. That's a G7 leader saying the old rules are dead. 4 days later, Trump tweets his threat, 100% tariffs on Canada if they negotiate trade deals with China. And here's where it gets interesting. 4 days after Trump's threat, on January 28th, Australia announces that Mark Carney will address their parliament in March. Not a ministerial meeting, not a trade conference, a full parliamentary address, the kind of honor Australia typically reserves for American presidents. The last person to get this treatment? Barack Obama in 2011. Australia's treasurer responds to Carney's Davos speech within 18 hours. In government time, that's impossible, unless they'd already coordinated the message beforehand. This wasn't a reaction. This was a plan. What's actually in that October document? Let me show you what everyone missed. The joint declaration from October has language that's never appeared in commodity agreements before. Paragraph 12, 4 specific terms: reciprocal offtakes for mining projects and co-investment in each other's stockpiles. Here's what that actually means. Australia can store Canadian graphite on Australian soil. Canada can stockpile Australian rare earth elements in Canadian facilities. If China cuts off one country, the other has backup supply. If America threatens one with tariffs, both have alternatives. This isn't trade cooperation. This is supply chain fusion. This is mutual assured supply, the commodity version of nuclear deterrence. Think about the strategic implications. Canada produces graphite and is developing rare earth separation capabilities. Australia controls massive rare earth deposits and is building its own processing facilities. Together, they're creating a system where threatening one means you're automatically threatening both, and neither needs permission from Washington or Beijing to make it work. The numbers that change everything. Let's talk about what Canada and Australia actually control. Combined, they have 107 rare earth exploration projects. Australia has 89, Canada has 18. By comparison, the United States has 12. Right now, China controls 85 to 90% of rare earth processing. That's the global choke point. Beijing has weaponized this advantage before. In 2010, after a maritime dispute with Japan, China cut rare earth exports. Japanese manufacturers panicked. The lesson was learned. But the landscape is shifting. Australia's Iluka refinery comes online in 2027. Canada's Saskatchewan Research Council facility is already operational. By 2028, the Australia-Canada partnership could control 15 to 18% of global rare earth separation capacity. That doesn't sound dominant, but it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be enough to break China's monopoly power. Enough so that when Beijing threatens export controls, there's an alternative. Enough so that countries have options. And while everyone was watching the US-Canada tariff drama, Japan made the smartest move on the board. Tokyo locked in decade-long supply agreements with both Lynas in Australia and Saskatchewan Research Council in Canada. Between 2023 and 2025, they quietly guaranteed their supply security while everyone else was fighting. Japan learned from 2010. They're not getting caught dependent on a single source ever again. The pattern you need to see. This isn't the first time middle powers have built alternatives to great power dependence. It's actually the fifth major iteration in 80 years, and each one happens faster than the last. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, Britain learned it couldn't automatically count on American support. Prime Minister Anthony Eden expected the U.S. to back Britain's intervention in Egypt. President Eisenhower refused and even threatened economic sanctions. Britain was humiliated. The response was the European Economic Community, founded in 1957. That integration took 40 years to mature into what we now know as the European Union. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window and ended dollar convertibility to gold. America's allies were blindsided. No consultation, no warning. The Bretton Woods system collapsed overnight. Europe began building what eventually became the euro. That process took nearly 30 years. In 2010, China weaponized rare earth exports against Japan. After a maritime territorial dispute, Beijing cut exports of critical materials that Japanese manufacturers desperately needed. Japan's economy faced potential paralysis. The response was a 15-year diversification strategy that's now complete, with locked-in supply agreements across multiple countries. During Trump's first term from 2018 to 2020, tariff threats hit American allies without warning or negotiation. Traditional partners like Canada, Mexico, and European nations faced sudden economic pressure. Europe and Canada began developing strategic autonomy frameworks, the diplomatic term for reducing dependence on American decision-making. Now, in January 2026, Trump threatens 100% tariffs. Within days, Carney delivers his Davos speech, and Australia responds with a parliamentary invitation. Notice the acceleration? The first iteration took 40 years to fully develop. The second took 20 years. The third took 15 years. This current one is producing structural responses in 80 days. The system's shock absorbers are failing. Each crisis produces faster, more decisive breaks from the old order. The system is losing its ability to absorb shocks. Who wins and who loses? Let's be clear about the winners and losers here, because some of them will surprise you. China is not winning from this. Every time Beijing expands export controls, Australia and Canada accelerate integration. In April 2025, China announced controls on 7 rare earth elements. 2 months later, Canada announced the G7 Critical Minerals Alliance. In October, China expanding controls to 12 elements. The Australia-Canada Declaration was signed within weeks. Beijing's strategy of leverage through scarcity is actually creating the alternative systems designed to defeat it. The United States is losing ground rapidly. In 80 days, America lost 3 critical assumptions. First, that allies need U.S. approval for major supply chain integration. Second, that tariff threats work without consequences. Third, that there's no viable alternative to American markets. Look at the numbers. Canada's export dependence on the United States dropped from 76.9% in 2024 to 67.3% by October 2025. That's an 8.6 percentage point drop in 10 months, the fastest diversification since NAFTA was created. When Trump threatened 100% tariffs, Canadian markets barely reacted. That tells you everything. They have options now. But here's the winner you didn't expect. India is positioned